Welcome to another episode of Unique Connections at the Table. And I'm really happy to have Julie Calveley here with us today from NAC Wellbeing. Julie, it's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's really great to be sharing these conversations with you, Beverley.
Great. Yeah, I feel the same. Julie, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So my background is in learning disability nursing, and I developed a real kind of love and passion for working with people with severe and profound disabilities more years ago than I would like to recall now. But that's been it's been an area I've been working in for the last sort of 30 or so years. Um, my PhD was in severe and profound intellectual disabilities, and I was particularly interested in looking at areas of dignity and communication in the area of intimate and personal care. Since then, I've kind of gone on to do various roles and jobs in health, social care, and education, and really kind of realised recently that all the different things I was doing was leading to trying to figure out how we can best support people who've experienced trauma. That's something I just realised many years ago that was potentially a really big issue for many people, but particularly people with severe and profound disabilities. So I've been looking at different approaches, trying to read, understand, learn from different modalities, I guess, and figure out how we can best support people in this area of trauma-informed care and support.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess anyone that's been following what we get up to at Unique Connections will already understand the crossovers between what we do and what
Yes.
you do, because some really similar interests and concerns there in terms of our work. So we've been working on a little article, haven't we, which addresses some of these, I guess, like brings our two focuses and our work together. Um, so that's what we wanted to talk about today, wasn't it? To talk about self-injury and then the sorts of work that we would bring to someone that was self-injuring.
Absolutely. And when we got together and had a chat, didn't we? And we realised that the way we were thinking about this and looking at this was really, it was both very much grounded in the science and the neuroscience, and but also grounded in care and compassion for people, and that bringing those two things together seemed to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess when before we start talking about self-injury, one of the things that I always find really helpful to do is to kind of set the scene a little bit about why we end up talking about this and discussing particularly like techniques around emotion and attunement, which is kind of what we want to talk about today. So I quite like to set the scene because something very specific has been happening for many years in the learning disability space and around the lives of those with learning disabilities, particularly if they hurt themselves. And that's that for 50 years or more, self-injury, if you have a learning disability, has been almost exclusively considered a behaviour, and talked about in terms of sometimes challenging behaviour or behaviour that challenges them, dealt with through things like behaviour charts and behaviour plans. And that's because it's really been understood through a biological and a behavioral lens. So thinking about it as the product of somebody's disability. So they hurt themselves because they have a learning disability or because they're autistic or because of a syndrome they have. And then thinking about it as a behavior. And by that, we mean that somebody's using the self injury as a way to communicate something that they need. So to communicate that they're in pain, or that they want something, or they want to get away from something, or they need attention for a particular need. And it's not to say that we would say that that's never true, but I think where we probably are both in agreement is that that isn't something that we really, that's not the go-to explanation for somebody without a learning disability. If you or I came across someone in their teens in a mainstream setting who was hurting themselves, we probably wouldn't ask as a first question, what are they trying to communicate to us about what they might need right now, or about the environment, or I wonder if they're in physical pain, or these would not be the questions that we'd ask. We'd probably ask something like, what has happened to you? Like, what is going on in your life that's so overwhelming that you feel like this is the only way forward for you? So we probably think about it from an emotional and a trauma perspective. And the funny thing is that any research that has taken the time to ask someone with a learning disability about their own self-injury, people with learning disabilities say the same as everyone else. They say that they self-injure um, to express overwhelming emotion, often in relation to traumatic or difficult experiences that they've had. So that's like us. That's why we end up talking about this all the time, isn't it? Because there's a lot of misunderstanding about where self-injury is coming from. And a lot of people, probably you have the same, we have the same, people say, can I send you their behavior plan? Could you just alter the behavior plan for us? And I always say, you can keep your behavior plan. Don't have a problem with your behavior plan, but that's not what we're bringing. So I think the sticking point is, if we're saying somebody might be hurting themselves because they're overwhelmed by their emotions in relation to trauma, but they have little or no spoken communication, where on earth do we go from there? And I
Yeah.
think that's why so many people go back to behavior plans, because at least that's concrete. When they do this, we do this. And it's nice and straightforward and linear.
Yeah.
But where do we go? Where do we go, Julie? Somebody's hurting themselves, they don't have any speech, and we think that it might be actually an emotional response to something like
Yeah.
what's what,
Absolutely. And that's understanding that emotional response is so key, isn't it? Picking
yeah.
up on what you've said. And what I hear a lot is a desire to find the triggers, to find what the triggers are that lead to the behaviour. And that's not a bad thing to do, or that might be helpful, obviously, to look at what's happening in the moments, or even the minutes and hours before perhaps an incident. But for the people that we're thinking about, it's just as likely that there's deeper stuff that's going on that's making them predisposed to reacting to things that are happening in their environment that we describe as triggers. So whilst we could continuously seek to remove the triggers, unless we actually help the person to feel better on a much deeper internal level, then feel like it's always going to be difficult to just remove all the triggers from someone's life. I don't think that's going to really get to the depth of helping someone heal and really, really feel better. It's almost slightly avoiding the issue, which is that this person's feeling pretty awful inside and therefore struggling with what's happening around them. So we could change what's going on around them. That's helpful, but we really need to try and change what's happening within them as well, and help
It's
them
right.
genuinely feel really safe and secure. So actually then the triggers could happen, but they're feeling so resilient and able to cope that perhaps those triggers don't really cause so much distress to them anymore.
Yeah, that's so true. And sometimes the triggers they change, don't they, over time for a person. And we've had conversations with people that have said, well, this person now exists in a low demand or a no demand world where we never ask anything of them. And that is not a world really any of us want to live in, because if no one's asking anything of you all day, it strips all the meaning and all the relationship and all the purpose out of you. Um, and so it feels, the trigger stuff feels like it might be useful for low level, early behavioral things. But once we've got someone on our hands who's really hurting themselves over the long term, I agree with you. I think it it doesn't it doesn't function well, and it doesn't really help anybody to reduce or to stop or to address the core concern. So I know that one of the first thing we wanted to talk about today was around attunement. And I think that's a word we use quite a lot, but can you help us understand what we mean when we say attunement?
Absolutely. And I think there's a bit perhaps before attunement that we might want to talk about as well, because attunement is one of the processes by which we might be able to support somebody to feel better, to manage better.
Mm,
But in order for us to be able to do that, to offer that, we need to be in an okay place ourselves as well. So, everything we've just talked about, recognizing the impact of that on the family and on the people supporting that individual, because it can be really tough to witness, to be with someone, just to know that somebody is hurting themselves. It's incredibly painful for the people around them.
yeah.
But you and I have sat here asking people to do this thing called attunement, and that's asking them to be in a particular state themselves to offer something, but perhaps tending and caring to that person's needs might need to come first, perhaps before we can do that. So I think we only have limited time today, but it just it's probably important to kind of underline that message and hold that before we do any work really to try and help the person, we need to make sure that the well-being of those people supporting in a supporting role is cared for and attended to. And that's an ongoing process. That's not a one day thing. That's something that we need to keep revisiting over and over, because these things aren't going to go away overnight. They're going to be likely to be happening for a long time, and they're long-term processes to help people feel better. So yeah, I know, Beverley, in your work that's sort of key, isn't it? That
Yeah, do a lot of that.
working with the staff teams or the families to support their well-being too. So if we assume that's people are in a pretty healthy state, then we can be talking to them about attunement, and really there we're talking about your ability to be with somebody else in a way that really recognizes and it seeks to understand deeply how that person's feeling and what's going on for them in terms of all of their physiological, psychological, emotional and states. And so kind of we might use behaviours to observe and to try and understand what's happening, but it's kind of trying to get beneath that and really, really understand layers deep what that thing we're seeing is telling us about how someone's truly, truly feeling. As an example, often we might see somebody behave in a way that could be described as aggressive. I would argue that very often if someone is seen to be behaving in that way, possibly that aggression or that perceived aggression is coming from a place of fear or anxiety. So being attuned to that would be recognizing what we're seeing here is fear or anxiety, not seeing it as being aggressive, because that's a very different way of seeing something. It's a very different mindset, and it's going to elicit a very different response in us.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
to be attuned to somebody is understanding really how they're feeling inside. And then the next step as part of attunement is not just to observe and see it and understand it, but then to respond in a way that's going to meet that person's needs in the best possible way.
yeah,
So clearly, if someone's appearing and we realise, well, that looks aggressive, but okay, actually we can realise this person's experiencing fear and anxiety, then we can adapt our reaction, our response, how we offer support according to those person's needs. And clearly in that situation, that person, although we need to keep everybody safe, doing anything that might be felt as punishing or aggressive back to someone is actually just going to exacerbate their fear and lead to a cycle of further difficulties.
yeah, that's really nice. So that second bit that you were talking about really brings us neatly into this idea of co-regulation, doesn't it? Where the offer is firstly that tuning into how someone is feeling and experiencing the world, and then secondarily the offer of a calm and present self that that person can make a connection with and borrow some of our calm, borrow some of the way that we've regulated our nervous system.
Absolutely. And mostly what we're thinking about today would fall into that category of our response. The best response we could have would be calming, because we are thinking about individuals who are likely to be feeling overwhelmed, in high state of anxiety, their stress response is up high. So our calmness can help them to feel more calm. But it might be worth just mentioning that attunement, an attuned response might also be about being excitable and offering a lot of energy, because we're attuning to someone and we see that they're disengaging because they might be bored, or they might be just really struggling to engage in the world. And sometimes distraction can be helpful. I've seen
Yeah.
amazing practitioners know exactly when to behave like a clown and to
Yeah.
entertain and sing and dance and tickle and do all these lovely things and wonderful things. But they're doing that from this attuned place. And that's a real skill, because if you go in and tickle someone when they're anxious and they're overwhelmed, that could be the worst possible thing that we could do. But another time we could know the person well enough, attune to them and realise that actually if we offer a little bit of just a bit of sort of something a bit distracting or a bit more enlivening, that can also be helpful too. So I think it's just worth remembering, because I think when people think about regulation and attunement, we're often thinking about calm, and it's okay to be excited too. It's okay for people to feel fear and anxiety too. All the emotions are welcome. Well, they're all human, but it's regulating them so that they're at a safe level, and it's that knowledge of how to respond.
I really agree with you. And I agree that a lot of times when we're talking about co-regulation and attunement, it's so commonly that we're dealing with manifestations of anxiety and fear. And so that's that's what we're attempting to introduce into that space. But I also remember, from many years ago that we were looking after a young man who was self-injuring extremely severely, and the team were able to identify that this was what we experienced when we were around him and when we tuned in was a really severe depression. And so to bring a calm self to a young man who's deeply depressed wasn't breaking the surface. It wasn't enough for him. We had to find ways to introduce, the only word I have for it is hope, is a hopeful presence, that there was hope for more for him, hope for something different and better. And so I wouldn't say that we went in lively, because that, in his circumstance, I think that would have been too much. But certainly there was a need to speak and to be present in a way that acknowledged his very low mood, but offered up something that was engaged and hopeful. And yeah, it's hard to explain exactly how do you present as hopeful, but that's what we built on as a team, really, is how to show up in a way that allowed him to, or invited him to, lift out of this state
Mm.
of depression. And that had a really significant impact on him. Yeah, so I think it does vary, doesn't it, and I think that first bit where we make sure that we come it's almost like a neutral enough present state, isn't it, to be able to sense what's happening for the other person. And if we are overflowing with anxiety or even like excitement or anything like that, then it's much harder to listen and to attune to the person in front of you. But even as we're talking about this, I can't help noticing it takes a good deal of generosity. That's what we're asking, isn't it, of support staff, that they show up from this very generous space where they're offering themselves out in a well-regulated way to listen to what the other person is experiencing, and then to match that and offer something else. And
Mm.
that's yeah, it's hard to do, and it's a act of massive generosity. But we do see frontline staff doing this all day long. They just don't have language for it, right?
Definitely, it's something it's very natural for many people, and for some, if they come to training, then all we're doing is really enhancing their natural skills that they have and making them aware of them. And those that are naturally good at it can then help others to develop their skills as well. Because most people, if you want to learn how to be better at this, you can. I think
Yeah.
it's very similar. I often think about going to meet a friend, but maybe a friend who something hasn't been too good in their life, and you'd go along and you would ask them with a little caution in your, how are you? But it would be you wouldn't go in with bundles of joy or excitement, and equally you wouldn't go in, oh gosh, with this sort of depressed
Yeah.
demeanor either. You would have that inquiring, curious, gentle, compassionate, caring, but you would offer that space, wouldn't you? You would ask the question and then you would really hold back and wait. But that's where we've got some words and we're relying on someone to be able to explain to us. So we're translating that style of attunement into a kind of a non-verbal form of attunement, which is a lot more about how we use the space around us, between us, between one another, how our non-verbal communication, which is our body language and our facial expressions, our tone of voice as well. How we kind of use all that to give that offer, I'm here for you, I'm listening, I want to understand. And then the waiting, kind of that ability to sort of hold that space and perhaps hold some silence to hear. And when I say hear, I mean hear with all our senses, with all of our senses, to try to understand what's going on. It's kind of giving that space for the person to come forward into that space. And when you described the situation where they just needed that space to be a little bit more uplifting, didn't they? So they could come up into something a bit more uplifting rather than
Yeah.
feeling like, oh gosh, we've got to stay
Yeah.
down in this depressed state. But you wouldn't go in too high either. So it's a very skillful balance. And we're not going to get it right all the time. With attunement and supporting people using co-regulation, there needs to be some really gentle trial and error and constant looking to check what we're doing. Is that working? Team responses, team observations, getting everybody's thoughts on how the person's responding and whether it's working well for them or not.
Yeah, it's really good. So in your work, Julie, you use two tools quite a lot. You use intensive interaction and video interaction guidance. Can you talk us through those and how they, because they kind of build on everything we've been talking about, don't they?
Absolutely. I can mention that, I think it's really important that with all of these approaches and ways of support, people do have really good training and support to be able to use them. And then that doesn't, I do believe that needs to be ongoing as well. So we can introduce it, can't we, today? And then people can
Absolutely.
kind of get in touch for more support. So intensive interaction, although originally was partly, it was mainly devised as a communication approach, but in its use, and Dave Hewitt and Melanie Nine, who first developed the approach, kind of they realised that it had this real power to offer as well. And whilst people can and do make really good communication attainments from us using intensive interaction, it can also be used as a way to be with somebody who's struggling to be with other people.
Mm.
So I think one of the things that people often understand when they think about intensive interaction is they grasp the bit, or the bit that gets communicated often is the bit about imitation. And that can be a part of intensive interaction. It can be a way that we respond to people to help them to develop their communication abilities, and to enjoy a kind of a to and fro, turn-taking conversation with us. But really before that, and particularly when we're working with people who are experiencing dysregulation, we can use the approach to find ways just to be with somebody, just to have time and share space together in a way that can kind of create those opportunities for co-regulation. So if I'm working with somebody, I'm thinking about a particular young person who liked to spend a lot of time under a blanket, who really struggled to kind of come out and to be with someone. So if I had a goal with him, it was really just to see if I could find a way that he would initially tolerate me being in his space in a way that didn't cause him any more distress, and then perhaps further on hope that he would maybe even like me being in his space, and then from that point perhaps we could develop interactions. But you need to get to that place of safety in the space together before you can really think about having an interaction with someone. So we are using intensive interaction, but it's parts of it, but it's more really focusing on the attunement, and the skills that we learn from intensive interaction can help us to offer that attuned response. So with this particular young person, he's under his blanket, head under the blanket. I made a decision to spend time with him, but from quite a distance, so distance outside of his reach. He couldn't touch me, I couldn't touch him, without moving, and stayed there for some time. And it wasn't actually that long. It surprised when I look back at the video. I kind of think it felt like a long time, but I think it was about 4 minutes. And after 4 minutes, he came out of his blanket and he looked at me. Not for long, but that's a start, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's those moments that we need to kind of celebrate and think, okay, that's a start. Within another couple of minutes, he comes back out again, and within a sort of 20-minute period, he did completely come out of the blanket, and he came and we had some physical interaction and face-to-face interaction. He did end up getting quite excited, actually. So my attunement with him was recognizing when that excitement might have become overwhelming for him, and I needed to
Yeah.
kind of calm my reactions, slow my reactions so as not to over arouse, and because that's possibly when could have become kind of difficult for him and out of control. That happened. I believe that interaction happened because I wasn't trying to make it happen. I was just trying to be there for him. I was just trying to be a safe person for him, somebody who was very not going to ask him to do anything, not place any demands on him, just be somebody he could be with and potentially feel safe with. And that's kind of linking together skills from intensive interaction,
Yeah.
understanding attunement, and how we can bring those together to potentially enable someone to learn to co-regulate. So they learn to co-regulate by being with another person.
Yeah.
Co-regulate seen as being foundational to regulation. So that would be a longer term sort of journey that we would like to go on with someone like that.
And I think you've really, I think you've used that phrase several times about being with, which is really to do with that relational and emotional development, isn't it? Before we can interact with someone, we have to learn how to be with someone, not to interact, just to be in their space. And that part of emotional relational development. And I think, where the sort of basic understanding of intensive interaction can cause someone's stress is where if we just think that it's about imitation, we go in and imitate somebody, that can feel very intrusive and invasive for someone. I think this idea of like it's an invitation and an offer to be with before it's anything else. And that, your example reminded me so much of a young lady I used to work with who, yeah, very similar, wanted to be under a blanket the whole time. And she liked the piano. I used to go and sit quite a long distance away and play the piano. And sometimes she would bring a blanket and she would come and stand by the piano. And if she did that, I would not interact with her. It would almost be as if I didn't require anything of her and I would just keep going. And then she would just, once she was ready, she would start to make contact. But it was almost like I just knew that if I went too fast, she would be back in the corner again, hiding. So it's trying to judge those things. And I
Absolutely.
think that's why the training is important. So are you you're able to offer training in these things, is that right?
Yeah, and absolutely, and it's that recognition that you had came from that understanding of trauma informed care, didn't it? It's
Yeah.
realizing that because people might be thinking, but why would you not then try to interact with someone? And it is that having that really deep understanding that for somebody who's experienced trauma, and particularly if that involves people might feel really unsafe to them. So us pushing it or trying to ask more of them, I think unless you've experienced it yourself, you're not. It's difficult to have empathy with it, but we really need to work on that and try to understand what that must be like for someone who finds people deeply, deeply frightening and
Yeah.
deeply difficult to be with. And
Yeah.
it could be because of trauma they've experienced. It could be because of some of the conditions that people have that just lead them to find people difficult to read. And if you can't read someone, then how do you know if they're going to hurt you or be kind to you? You know, there's so many complexities here. But if we can allow that person to interact on their own terms, then they are going to feel safer to do so. And they're way more likely to want to come and do that again. But yeah, so trying to in our training, make sure that we integrate the understanding of a trauma-informed approach with applying principles like intensive interaction so that people aren't feeling that pressure to, right, okay, so I've learned intensive interaction, that's why I need to go and make these wonderful interactions happen where this person starts with me and we're having these that's lovely and that happens but it'll happen more likely if you hold back and relax and if we just get to that point where that person is just looking up and they're with us because they're looking at us and they're calm, so they're feeling safer, their nervous system is settled, they're not feeling like they need to hurt themselves, then this is great. This is a really
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful to understand that. And the video interaction guidance that you use is a technique to train staff to learn these things, isn't it?
yeah, it's a tool that I think works really well. So it's but with intensive interaction and video interaction guidance, it's a kind of a version, if you like, of those that we can really pull together beautifully because the both of them are about how we can offer attunement to another person. But with video interaction guidance, it's two things that I love about it. One, well, lots of things, but the two of the main things I love about it, it's a very practical way of actually being able to support people to practice development. So we can support practitioners through looking at what they're doing well. So we're not going to use video to say, oh, look what you did there, you shouldn't have done that. We use the video to find moments of connection, to find moments of attunement, and to show, wanting to show them they can see it for themselves and that it can see, oh, I missed that at the time, but actually, yes, when I got down lower and just sort of held back and relaxed myself, the person, they did look over at me, but I hadn't realised that at the time. And once we start to notice those moments of connection, we can build on those. So it's a very positive framework for offering practice feedback. And it's also that focus on kind of attunement and finding ways to be with someone that's very much rooted in kind of neuroscience, understanding how interactions develop and work. But that kind of that positive framework is a really important thing about it.
Thanks. That's so helpful. And it's also good to know that, particularly for like schools and organizations who feel like these tools would be useful to them, that they can go to nacwellbeing.org and reach out to you, or just reach out to you direct, Julie, as well, isn't it, for some support with these things. So I think our just to draw things together, I think when I the common conversational pushback that we both probably encounter from people, which is like, we have to use behavioral techniques because we don't know how to work with, like it might be trauma or it might be emotional overwhelm, but how can you support somebody who doesn't have any speech with these things? These are, so we're just going to go back to behavioral methods. Like there are techniques available, aren't they, to help people to do, and really this is everything we're talking about is also about helping someone to develop their emotional and their relational development skills, isn't it? To move them forward in those things, which has like lots of wider benefits as well. And this has been, I think, my experience of supporting someone in this much more holistic and relational way around self-injury is that it does help the person to get their self-injury under control, but it has lots of other positive benefits as well, lots of other like effects in terms of enhancing well-being and emotional regulation and safety and these other
Yeah.
things.
Absolutely, and we are talking about evidence-based approaches here, in terms of like drawn from the evidence and the research base, but also we have methods of being able to track progress, if you like, to look at
Totally.
outcomes and to be very kind of clear about how what we're doing and what we're offering is actually helping or not, and if it's not, then we need to change it. So that's really critical that we are kind of being able to evidence that we're helping somebody. So, but the behavioural issue, we are up against a situation where behaviour is what we see. It's very easy to document it, but my personal feeling, and speaking more as a mother than anything, but and no, not just as I am speaking as a mother, but also in my work life, it's fairly easy to get rid of the behaviours, but I don't want to just get rid of the behaviours. I want the person to genuinely feel better inside. I don't want to eradicate the behaviours and have someone still feel awful and still
Yeah.
feel unsafe and still feel like they can't, inside they're overwhelmed, or that they have to drive their behaviours underground so that nobody's seeing them because they're not acceptable. So these aren't full solutions to me to the
Yeah.
problem that we're trying to solve, which is to help people feel safe and well and content, calm, able to manage their
Yeah.
feeling and relationships.
Wow. That's a really great thought to end on. And I think it's going to resonate. What you've said will resonate, I think, with a lot of people. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Julie. Really good.
Thank you, Beverley. Thank you. Lovely to see you.
You too.